Hi! Welcome aboard to this Excel Virtually Global event. My name's Liam Bastick and I'm an alcohol... Oh no, that's a different session. I'm one of the organisers of the Excel Virtually Global event, and for my sins I drew lots, and I'm also going to be one of the presenters. So lucky us, eh? So welcome aboard. Look, for the past 30 years, I've worked in decision analysis, strategy, and corporate finance. That's mergers and acquisitions, valuations, and modelling, working for various consulting and accounting firms. My point is here, I'm not some IT guru or expert, so I'm going to try and speak in layman terms here, or laywoman terms. Don't want to sound sexist here. Um, Essentially, what I am is a bit of an author in Excel, and I've been recognized by both Microsoft and Crime Watch as an MVP. That's a most valuable professional, one of 70 or so such appointed experts around the globe in Excel. Now, in this session today, I've called it Most Comprehensive Excel Example Ever. Well, that's going to live up to expectations, isn't it? What I'm going to try and do in this one, 45 minutes or so, is I'm going to take an age-old Excel problem for making lists much more manageable by combining some of the new things like dynamic arrays, new functions, and operators with some of the old, such as data validation, custom number formatting, and conditional formatting. With the ugly, I'm going to deliberately create some errors and use non-auditable functions like indirect, and I'm also going to look at the underutilized, such as tables, text functions, and good old transpose. Now, look, whether the example strikes a chord is not the issue here. It's not a case of, oh, I'm going to go off and use this. What I want you to see is more how I'm getting all these different things to come together. You may not have dynamic arrays yet on your machine. That's not the point. It's coming soon, and it's about thinking about outside the box and how the old, the new, the ugly, the underused can all be put together. So look, it's a recorded session. I'll be taking questions at the end. I am here. I just wanted this to go without a hitch so I don't stuff up and I tremble over my... Oh no. See, I can edit that out if I want to, but I chose not to. So look, bring your best speed reading glasses, a healthy sense of humour, and a seatbelt because you're going to have to strap in for this ride, baby. So let me show you what I'm going to do here. It might not be the most amazing thing you've ever seen, but it's going to be something that's going to bring together a lot of different things. And I quite like this example for that very reason, because it brings in some of the new stuff, it brings in the old, and I just like it. Look, what I've got is I've got a sheet here with a lot of data in. Let's say this is my customers here. I've got Claudio, Josefina, Britt, Hans, and so on. I've got lots and lots and lots of people. Maybe I've even got some duplicates, typos, who knows. What I want to be able to do is on an output sheet, I want to be able to pick which of these names I want. Now, I could have lots and lots and lots of different people to pick from. And it's going to get quite awkward if I've got to keep searching down where it is in here. Oh, missed it, it's a bit up here or whatever. Wouldn't it be good if I just started typing in two of the letters I know that are in the actual name, like A, B, and then you could actually have in here, it's either Gabriella Moore, Gabrielle Patrick, or Jason Abbott. It's Gabrielle Patrick. And then for this one, I'll type in DR, and I get, well, it's either Adriana Todd, Sandra Potts, or Solomon Andrade. Oh, yes, the one and Solomon Andrade, and so on. Wouldn't that be cool to be able to do this? Now, people have been trying to work ways around this for many, many years now. Now, one of the simplest ways of trying to get this to work is using a basic function in Excel that's been around for years and hiding things, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. Let me show you how the old school thinking works before we look at the new idea. The first thing to actually make sure you get right if you're going to do it the old way is to make sure your file options, your tools options are correct. Now you can click on the file backstage and go in that way and go file options, or you can just use the keyboard shortcut Alt-TO, Tango Oscar. So if I bring that up, it brings up my Excel options here. And in here, if I go to formulas, I can actually make sure that my formula autocomplete is checked on. That's what's needed for this. If you don't have that on, it's not going to work. It shows a list of relevant functions and defined names when building cell formulas. That's what I'm looking to do here. As long as that's working, it's fine. So, having done that, you actually compile your entire list. So I've got my entire list here, and what you could actually do is hide this. So I could go in here and take all these rows, just all the way down. It's exciting, isn't it? and then I could either hide or I could use the keyboard shortcut Alt Shift right arrow, which would allow me to group them, or I could also go to Data and I could go to Group and Group it this way to group them all up. Now, if I wanted to put the next name in, let's say I start TW. TW, do you see how it's auto-completing up here and giving me Twyla Rubio? How's that working? Well, because it's in the same contiguous list, it's just connected, you'll see that Twyla is just up here. So it's bringing it up and it's allowing me to pick it in. Now, it's not giving me an actual drop-down box. It's just finishing it off for me. If I were to put in SHO for here, for short, it's not going to work for Hunter Short. But if I were to actually instead start putting in Hunter, it will eventually auto-complete for me. So it's not good at picking up the middle, but it does allow you to actually get to the right item if it's already in there, as long as you start with the first few letters. So one of the problems with this is it doesn't always work with lists that contain duplicates. It assumes that you are typing the first letters of the name in. You have to replicate the list, the whole list. If you've got like that 5,000 lines above it, you'll have to put them all in first of all, that they're all above. And what happens if you're going to add to that list at some point? And it only displays once Excel has ruled out all the other alternatives. So it isn't necessarily the best way. So instead, I'm going to do it my way, which is using a drop-down box where I just type in letters that I know are in the name and let the whole thing work for itself. Ready? Right, make sure you've got your seatbelt on because it's going to be a fast ride. Now the solution I'm going to propose will only work in what used to be known as Office 365 and is now called Microsoft 365, as it relies on something called dynamic arrays, which is a pretty new feature still. Now you might think I'm being a little niche in this instance, but look, if you don't have Office 365, do keep listening. This might just convince you it's time to make the switch. Now, unless you've had your head under a rock for the last year or so, you probably know what dynamic arrays are, but just in case, let me explain. An array is just a group of cells that can be more than one row and more than one column. In this particular case, I'm having a lot of rows, but just the one column. Here, my names list of my customers. Now, if I were to go here and go equals and click on this cell, I get Claudia Lamb. But if I were to actually group this whole range, F13 to F213, to get my 201 customers, well, in normal Excel, I get a hash value at this point because it wouldn't know what to do necessarily. Or it might show me just the one on the intersect, depending on how I'm using it in a formula. This, however, has spilled. It's actually propagated the entire list downwards as if I'd gone equals F13 in the first cell and copied it down. Now, this is known as spilling. You see I've got equals F13 to F213 with Claudia Lamb in the first one, and then after that it's still got the same formula, but it's greyed out. Notice the blue box which shows the range that it actually pertains to. If I were to type something in here, and literally I will type something in there, I get a hash spill error because it's blocking it from actually propagating down the page. So just watch out for that. If I were to add another name at the bottom of this, I don't know, let's put my name in. Look what happens. Nothing. There's a reason for this. I said equals F13 to F213. If I want to include my name, I've got to put F214. Now if I go down, there it is. But that's a bit of an awkward thing to have to keep doing that every time. So that's not the way to do it. So I'll just clear this out by deleting the formula in the lead cell. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make this range dynamic. I'm going to extend it both in rows and columns by saying this range can be extended. I'm going to turn it into what's called a table. To do that, I go to Insert, and here on the left here, we have got Insert Table. Keyboard shortcut, if I come up here, is Control-T. If I click on that, this is a feature that came in Excel 2007. It brings up an actual dialog box over here, Create Table. Just to show you, yes, that is my range, F12 to F214, and I do have headers indeed. Now, let's now turn that into a table. Now, normally tables will look more like this thing up here. If I go here, this kind of like blue and white straddle lines. Because I actually had colored all these cells yellow, it doesn't make a difference. The other annoying thing is though with the table, I would like it to actually name as I go through. Now it has given it a name here, table 2, but I'd love to be able to put the name in so I can make it clearer in formulas that I use. I'm with Ken Pulse on this one. He's had a major bee in his bonnet about this for years. He's a fellow MVP and he's also presenting at Excel Virtually Global. So we've got that here. So clicking on here, well, as long as I'm in this table here, I have up here the table design tab. This is what we call a context specific tab. And over here on the left, if I go over here, is the table name. And I can change it to something more meaningful, like customers. Now, don't put spaces or things like that in here, because that would be what we call an illegal character. It's not allowed. If you're not sure, the difference between unlawful and illegal, well, unlawful means to contradict or contravene the rules or regulations of the territory or jurisdiction that you are placed upon, whereas illegal is a sick bird. Who's still listening to me? Alright, so I've got my table here, and to show you how I can add a column, I can just type in a heading here. Let's do search criteria. And look at that, it's made all the cells yellow because the cells to the left were, and I've got a table, it's extended as a result. Pretty cool, don't you think? Now, in order to get this to work, I'm going to use some of the new and some of the old. And to begin with, I'm going to use something old for a helper formula here. I'm going to use a function called search. So if I go in here to search, let me just show you the syntax. It's quite an old function. It wants you to actually type in the text you're trying to find, where you're trying to find it, the within text, and where do you want it to start? Do you want it to start searching from the beginning of the text string or later on? So in this particular case, what I want it to actually do is search in my search criteria. So it's going to be this cell here, my customer search criteria. And this is the syntax you get when you reference inside a table. The @ symbol just means it's from the customers table search criteria on this row. That's what that means. And then I want it to look for things in this entire column, which says therefore customer names. Pretty good, don't you think? Now, because I've got dynamic arrays, once I press enter here, what will actually happen is, if I scroll back up so you can see it before I press enter, oh, it's exciting, it propagates. And because my search criteria is blank, it's fine it in the first cell. It just means it's a free choice. Pretty easy, don't you think? So that's what's actually going on here. It looks quite good. This is my helper formula here. This is going to be my lists that I'll put together. And I might even make this a nice little, so I'm going to use my formatting here to make that lists. Now, what I'm going to do here is, the reason I've not included this formula in the table, which would seem to make more sense, is as follows. Let me imagine how I had actually done that in the table. So I'll do exactly the same thing, but just type it here. Equals search this criteria in this list. Now, as soon as I do it this time, watch what happens. I get a hash spill error. It would have simplified the formula. You see, the formula seems to be simpler because it doesn't have to put the actual customer's name in because it knows you're in the customer's table. However, it doesn't work. The spill feature isn't supported in Excel tables, hence the double-edged sword I'm talking about here. Yes, the formula's got to be more complex, but it must be excluded from the source table. And this can be a source of frustration if you want to extend later, because you'll have to actually keep dragging down the formula. So just be aware of that as you're going through, that you can't actually put this calculation into a table. Let's take more of a look at this formula I've just put in then. I'm going to actually put some search criteria and I'm going to put the letter A in here. So if I put the letter A in search criteria, do you see that what's happening is the formula is always going to link to this first one, the search criteria in this one. So it's looking for the letter A in customer names. Now, in the first row, Claudio Lam has an A at position 3. For Josefina Dickerson, it's in position 8, as is Britt Vasquez, because of space is a character as well, and so on. Now we've got people like Ned Lowe and Lincoln Bond that don't have the letter A, and therefore they get hash values. Now, having these prima facie errors like hash value, hash ref, hash NA, hash div 0, hash brown, hash pipe, not good for formulas. So it's a good way to get rid of them is to use an is function to get rid of these functions so that we get them in. So we could usually use things like is error or something like that. But there's a more specific one, is number. because what I want to do is I want to just know whether it's a number. I don't need to know what position it's in. I just want to keep it in the list. I want it to be one of the names I'm going to consider if that letter is in the name. Otherwise, I don't want it to be in. So I just want it to come back true or false. And that's why is number is brilliant. I just wrap an is number around it because all the is functions, I think there's about 12 of them, they just give you either true or false depending on whether it's whatever it is you're looking at. In this case, is it a number? So if I go is number here, not is NA, but is number, what will actually happen when I have learned to type is if I wrap it round, anything that is a number will give a true, and anything that isn't, including errors, will be a false. So that's great. Now I've actually got something in here that was going to help me. I've got my list of things that would still be considered with the letter A. And if I put a U instead, then you'd see that I've got Claudio Lamb would still be okay, but then there's lots and lots and lots and lots of falses. But we've got here, for instance, Paul Norman is still true, and there will be others too. And that's what's happening. I want to sort of reduce my list as I type them in. See how it's working? Now to do that, there is a new dynamic array function out there called filter, and we can use filter to go further with this. Let me explain how filter works. Let me show you how filter works. Here, I've got some very confidential data. I've got 15 items, they're different shapes, different colors, and I know how many sides there are. Now, I could turn this into a table if I wanted, or I could just click on here and go to the data tab, and I could add a filter. And then if I wanted to, I could filter, for instance, on triangles and see which ones are the triangles. Pretty good, eh? This is what the filter function actually does. It does exactly the same thing, but formulaically, and it uses filter. So I've got a little drop down box here I created, and I'll talk to you how I did that later, but I'll change it to triangle. And then in here in this cell, I'm going to use the filter function. So if I type in equals filter, here it is, and if we look at the actual syntax up here, it has 3 arguments. 2 are required. The first one is the array. This is required and represents the range that is to be filtered. Include is also required. This specifies the conditions that must be met, or you can just put true and false in there if you want, which is what we're going to do in a second. And the if empty, that argument's optional. This is what will be returned if there's no data that meets the criterion or criteria specified in the include argument. So it's generally a good idea to at least use in double inverted commas to make it empty if there's nothing in. So let's put this together then. So my actual range is going to be these here without the table, I13 to I27. And the condition I'm going to have is that the actual shape, so I'm doing this column, G13 to G27, equals this shape here, G33, the triangle. Otherwise, I'm going to put no data in speech box. If I press enter, do you see I have now got triangle? And if I change this to circle, it gives me my circle data. If I go to square, it gives me my square data. And if I go to pentagon, there is no data. And this is how filter works. It's just a brilliantly simple way using dynamic arrays to actually filter in a formulaic fashion. Okay, let's go back to the example. What I've created in my example to date is a list of true or falses. This is my include condition for my filter. You see how it works? I just have that as going to be my include. So I need to wrap this in the filter function. So I'm going to just type at the beginning of this equals filter. And then what is it I want to return? Well, it's the customer names. So I'm going to go and take all these customer names, the whole list, comma. Otherwise, it's going to be is number, all this, which will be my trues and falses going through. And at the end, if there's nothing, I just wanted to put no data as before. Close speech marks, close brackets. And there you go. I have my list of names in here that actually meets. You see Claudio Lamb, Eleanor Kaufman, Paul Norman, Aubrey Giles, and so on. If I put DR here instead, I get Solomon Andrade, Adriana Todd, Sandra Potts, and so on. If I put XYZ, I get no data, not in there. See how it works? Pretty cool. So this is giving me my list of names. So if I go back to AU for these, this is my list. Maybe I would like to sort this into alphabetical order because if I'm going to have a drop-down box with these actual lists in, I want to be able to find it easily because there might still be quite a few as I go through. Yeah. Also, there could be duplicates, so I need to actually make sure that they're not just sorted, but they're unique. Unfortunately, with dynamic arrays, there are two functions that will help me, cunningly called sort and unique. Now, the question here is, which one do we do first? Do we go through and just get a unique list and then sort it, or do we sort it and then get rid of duplicates? Well, I think you'll imagine it's much easier to sort the numbers 132 than 13221331222313. Takes less resources. Therefore, I would definitely do the unique first and the sort second. Hopefully that makes sense. So, okay, let's go and have a look at both of those functions and then we'll put them in. Let's start then with unique. Now, bizarrely, unique is not unique. This is the thing that makes me laugh. It either details distinct items, that is, it provides each value that occurs with no repetition, or it also can return values which occur once and only once in a referred range. What I'm going to be looking at here is I'll be focusing on the former use. So let's play with this data I've got. I've got a table of store, salesperson, section, and manager, and I want to have a list of just the unique items, i.e. not those that only occur once, but I want a list with no duplicates in it. So I can just go here, equals unique, and then if you look at the actual syntax, if we go to this, it's got a few arguments. It's got 3. The first one is the only one that's required, and that is array. This represents the range or array from which to return unique values. The by column argument is optional. This is a logical value which is either true or false, and it indicates how to compare. If you wish to compare by row, then you should make this false or omitted, since this is the default. But if you want to do it by column, you'll need to select true. In this particular case, I won't need to do it, so I will be omitting that. And then the final one occurs once. Well, this argument's also optional. It requires a logical value. If you wanted to only return unique values that occur once, it will be true. But if you want it to just have the distinct items, so it just gives you a list without any duplicates, then you would have false, and that's what it is, omitted. So in this case, I only need to put the first argument in, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to highlight the store, F13 to 41, and that gives me the list of all of the items that are in here that are different. So if I put north with a space in here, for instance, you would see I would get 2 norths because it does differentiate between the two of them. And then I can just copy this formula across, and I'll get the salesperson, sections, and manager. And that's what I'm looking to do here, is create a list. So it's just giving me a list that I can then organize, and so I don't want any duplicates in here. So that's pretty much all there is to it. If I wanted to get rid of anything where there might be spaces, I might use trim first of all with the whole thing. I'm not going to bother here, but you could if you wanted to make it more complicated. That's unique in a nutshell, and of course it's crying out once you've got this data, you'd like to sort it as well, wouldn't you? Let's get sorted. I've got some data. I've got a first name, a last name, and the points. And look at this, it's taken me a while to come up with all these great names here, so I do hope you appreciate the effort I've put in. Perhaps I want to actually sort these points into the right order. Well, it's as simple as this. I just go down here, and I'll just type in here, equals sort. And as soon as I do that, I get more syntax, and this time it has 4 arguments, only the first one is required. So array represents the range that is required to be sorted. Then the second one, sort index, this is optional, and this refers to the position of the row or the column in this selected array. So is it the second row, the third column, etc. So 99 times out of 98, you'll be defining the column, but to select a row, you'll need to use this argument in conjunction with the 4th argument by column. That would be what I'd probably say. Be careful though, it's a little counterintuitive. And the default value here is just 1. The sort order is also optional. The choices for sort order are 1 for ascending, that's the default, or 1 or -1 I should say for descending. It should also be noted that you might not want to hold your breath waiting for sort by color, sort by formula, or sort by customer list, as they're not coming anytime soon. The final argument by column is also optional. Now, most of the time you'll want to sort your rows of data, so this will be, you want this value to be false, which is also the default value if it's not specified. But should you be booking in for your current mental health check, you might wish to use true if you want to sort by column in certain instances. Most of the time, all you're going to do is just go sort, pick your column or your row, and that's it, be done. So that's what I will do here, just to show you what happens in that instance. I just go sort, take this, and you'll see in that particular instance, it's actually sorted them into ascending order. If I instead I want to make it descending order, then that's going to actually affect back in here, comma, comma, not the start of a Culture Club song. In here, I will have it descending, so I'll be picking that one -1. And press enter. And now if I look back at it, it's put it the other way around. But you might want to do the whole table. So you want the whole table to come out. Well, that's going to be easy too. You can just go, okay, let's just sort the whole range. So I'm going to take this whole table. Then the sort index is going to be on the third column, so comma 3, and the sort order is going to be descending -1. Close brackets. Here you go. How long would that take you to do in old Excel? You'd be doing ranking, and then you'd be doing index match, or you'd be using VLOOKUP or something like that if you don't want the right answer, but it will come up with a way of putting it together. So there you go. Sort and unique together, deadly combination. Let me show you then how easy it is to put those back in our case study. Returning to our example then, our good old filter is number search function that we've got so far, we need to add in then sort and unique, but we need to get them the right way round. Remember, we want to sort once we've got rid of duplicates, not actually sort it first and then remove the duplicates, because that could take longer. And this is an important mindset to get into. Working with dynamic arrays can mean you start taking for granted some rather voluminous but unnecessary tasks otherwise. Putting functions in the wrong order can simply make the difference between a 1 and a 10-second calculation. Therefore, make sure you do unique first and sort afterwards. So let's do that. We just wrap them in. We're going to use the most basic versions of those two dynamic array functions. So unique, first of all, UNIQ, we'll bring it up and just press tab and another close bracket. Removes any duplicates. There aren't any, so there's no effect. But now if I go back in and make sure you're in the top one here, we go equals sort, open brackets, and then close brackets. We now have this ordered. And that will be good for our drop-down list because it's going to make it easier for our search criteria of AU. But if I want this one to be a BR, let's say, and this one's CO, and this one's COD, and so forth, it's having no effect. Because what's happening is I've only got the formula in for the first search criterion. That's all I've actually got in here. Really what I want to do is be able to drag this formula down so I can have the same, or well, not the same list, but different lists based on different search criteria. But it doesn't work like that because I've spilled it. I've spilled it down, so I need to get it to spill across. And to do that, I need to transpose. And this brings me to a very old but very useful Excel function, transpose. Something old here now. Now, transpose is what we call an array formula. This means it requires being entered as Control-Shift-Enter. In the old days, but not with dynamic arrays. Brave new world. All I have to do is type in transpose before it and make a close bracket at the end. And rows become columns and columns become rows. Voila! Now I can copy this down. Go all the way to the end, and then I have got my actual list that should be used for each of these rows when I'm using different search criteria. You can see here that's a different one for BR. I've got Amparo, Cordell, Francisco for CO, COD, there's no data, and so on. It's worked. Now what I need to do is I need to take this data and I just need to go to the very end. Now you've got to be careful about using Control A and things like this in this case because some of the rows and ranges are different. So I'm actually doing this the old-fashioned manual way, which just makes sure I get the entire list. That's all I'm trying to do, going out to the end. It's just to be a little bit more careful. Now notice when it's blank you get the entire list, which is exactly what you want. So I just thought I'd mention that. And I'm just going to put this, now that I've selected that range, back up to the top. I'm going to put a little box around this so I have my data. And then anything that's blank, I want it to be a grey cell. I'm going to make it look a bit prettier. I'm talking conditional formatting. Been around quite a few years now. On the Home tab, conditional formatting is here. It's this button over there. And if I actually click on it, there's different things I can do, but I want the new rule. So I'm going to go for my conditional formatting, new rule, brings up my dialog box, and then I can choose what I'm going to do in here. Now I could go for formatable cells based on their values, but sometimes doing that with trying to look for empty cells can be difficult. It's easier just to go straight to use a formula to determine which cells to format. And we'll select that, and then you put the formula in as if you're in the top left hand corner of your range, and you're going to copy it across and down in Excel. So be careful about anchoring, which is what conditional formatting likes to do. So we're going to be in this top cell here, which is I13. So I'm just going to type in here equals I13 so I don't have to bother with anchoring. And then I'll just go equals open speech marks, close speech marks. So I've got that, it's just saying I13 is empty. When that happens, I'm going to format this with a fill of grey, and I'll also do some custom number formatting. I'll click on number and go to custom, and it's just in case, even though it is supposed to be empty, just to make sure nothing can be seen through, I'm going to do semicolon, semicolon, semicolon to say nothing should be visible. Before the first semicolon is how positive numbers should be formatted. Between the first and second is how you want negatives. Between the second and the third is zeros, and after the third is how you want text. I'm just saying I don't want to see anything. So once I've done that, I can click OK and OK again, and you'll see now that wherever it's blank, it's gone grey. Bit like my brain. Okay, so we've got this all nice and pretty now. We've got this all ready to go. We've got my data that I'm going to use for my drop-down list. So it's time now to go to the actual sheet. So I'm going to go to my resulting list sheet, where I need to put some calculations in first of all, to get the whole thing working. So the workings I wouldn't recommend you actually put on this sheet. I would actually be doing it somewhere else, but just for simplicity here, I'm going to do the workings all in one place and then my calculations afterwards. That okay? If it's not, I don't care. Time for calculations then. I'll explain what I'm doing probably afterwards, but let's just concentrate on putting the formulas in first of all. So the cell in the row above the first list item equals, we'll go back to the data sheet, is going to be this label lists. So that's data cell I12. And I'm just going to put next to this here what this is in terms of formula text. You can see what I'm doing. I might just colour it red. These are going to say hash NA at the moment because I've not put anything in, but just give you an idea of what I'm about to do. Now, in this one, I want to actually put the formula that's in the cell above it. So I'm going to put in here equals formula text and then click on this cell here. That will give me the actual thing, data I12. But if somebody has a version of Excel that doesn't recognize formula text, it's a good idea to wrap this in an if error function and just put a open and close speech marks so that if it does cause an error, it's just blank. So we've got that in here. I'll come back to this sheet name and column in a second, but for this one, I want to get the row that the label is on. So I'm going to go equals row and back to this sheet here and take this cell, data I12, which will give me row 12. And I might even center that just for neatness. In fact, let's center them all for neatness. Now, the sheet name and column, this requires a formula in here, and I'm going to use the mid function. And again, I'll explain all this in a second. So I'm going to do mid, and I'm going to go to the cell here, I15, and then I'm going to put some hard code in, which I don't like doing. And I use the len function, so length for cell I15, close brackets, minus the length, open brackets of I17, the cell beneath, close brackets, -1, close brackets. And that gives me the sheet name and the actual column data I. So what on earth have I been doing? So it might not seem obvious immediately what I'm doing, so let me explain. I want to set a reference cell immediately above where the formula for my first dynamic list is. That is, it's going to be back on the worksheet here. So this I'm going to use as my base cell for my source data. So let's just go through. If you cannot follow the formula, in this cell, then I suggest Excel might not be for you. What I then do, as I mentioned, is I'm just explaining that I've got that calculation in here. That's what I'm going to do then. And then what I've done is I've worked out what the row number is in row 17. And I've used these interim calculations so I can get this out of row 16. This is what I'm looking for. I want this sheet name and the exclamation mark and the column. So after that, I can sort of combine things together. So what happens here is the length function, the len function, determines the length of a text string. So the length of I15 determines the length of the equals data exclamation mark I12, which is 9 characters if you add it up. Similarly, the length of I17 determines the length of the row number 12, which is 2 characters. So therefore, if I were to subtract the length of I17 from the length of I15, that would be equal to the length of equals data exclamation mark column I, which is 7 characters. But actually, I don't want the equal sign. So I'm going to start this at position 2, and this is what the mid function does. So if we look at mid here, and I'll just blow this up in here, mid requires some text. It tells you where the start number is. So we want it to start at the second position. So I'm going to remove the equal sign. I already know length of I15 minus length of I17 would deliver back equals data exclamation mark I. And so by starting at position 2, it would actually make it data exclamation mark I1 because it would take the number 1 from the I12. And therefore, that's why I subtract 1 off here. So hopefully that sort of figures out, you think, yeah, that makes sense to me now, Liam. You've got the data sheet name and you've got the exclamation mark. Great. So what? Well, so what is we need to actually keep building. This has got me the start of it. These would be workings and wouldn't necessarily need to be on this sheet. So let's have some outputs. So I'll just put outputs here in cell D20. Let's just format it so it's the same. And I'm going to have a helper column here. So let's start the helper column in here, helper and the customers. I'm just going to make this column a bit wider so we can see helper. Let's not go that wide. Let's just go to where it says helper, shall we? So I've got this, might make this a bit wider. And I'll style this as a table heading, so we've got those in here. Great. Now, the helper here, what I want to do is I want to actually get the actual calculations going through. Now, let me just talk about spilled ranges again. If I put the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and I go equals and select this range, that gives me equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I go here equals that range, what actually happens is, do you see that it gives me this formula equals, looking up here, L24 hash, and the hash says the whole spilled array. And this is what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get this formula so I can actually get the range of the spilled array, which doesn't have to go down, it can spill across, which is what we've actually done back on the data sheet. If you look back here, the spill, so I want to get equals I13 hash, equals I14 hash, equals I15 hash across. That's what I'm trying to do. So I want to get that from my actual calculation. So I'm going to go here equals this I16, make that absolute here. And then what I'm going to do then is then connect to that. I'm going to need to add, because that's not giving me the number yet. I'm going to go, okay, so it's going to be I17, because it starts, row 12 is the list, plus, and that needs to be anchored as well. We'll use the rows function on this here. I'm just going to select this semicolon D22. But this one, I'm going to allow row 22 to run wild. And then I'll go close brackets, conclude the rows function, close brackets again. And then I need to connect that with the hash symbol. So put it like that. And I get data exclamation mark I13 hash. And then if I copy this down, I get I14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And if we go back to this data sheet, the final one I need here is row 214. So if I've got row 214, I'm going to need to do this quite a few times. So I'm going to go down to about 221-ish, something like that. Let's not go down quite that far. try 221, and I need to go 3 more, and that gets me down to 214. So that will pick up all my data for each of them if I wanted that many points. Now, I might not need to bring them all in. This is just that I've got the same number as there are actual items, so I could bring in the entire list of customers should I wish. And this is going to be data that I will use as and when. So I'm going to call this parameter so that I've just got this in here. And you can see I've got all the things in here. Now, that's going to actually provide my numbers. Let's get rid of this now. So my customers here, well, this is going to be an assumptions cell. So put that in, and I'm going to create some data validation in a minute. So what I need to do now is I need to actually think, okay, how am I going to get a drop-down list with the customers? Well, let's think about that. So the plan is as follows now. I want to put some data validation drop-down lists into each of these boxes, but instead of it actually selecting the whole range, I want it to only be a certain subset of it based on the characters I put in these cells. Well, at the moment, those characters are in these cells, and I've got that working here, but I want it to be on the other sheet. So the first thing I need to do is perhaps delete these things now and actually use an if statement. So I'm going to say equals if, open brackets, the corresponding cell on this sheet, which would be here, is empty, so just open close speech marks, then open close speech marks, otherwise it's going to be this cell. So if I just go through, makes it nice and easy, simple trick we've used time and time again. And what happens is, because this is in a table, that's now propagated down the whole row. I go back to this and type in AU. That will just now have AU in here, and you can see it's got this list shortened as before. And I could do the same with the others and put AU, BR, CO, COD, etc. Let me just center this. So I need to create a drop-down list. Now you create drop-down lists by going to Data, and then in here you go to Data Validation, so this button over here, and Data Validation keyboard shortcut, Alt-DL. I want to create in here a list, and there's this beautiful thing in here called list, and then I'm going to say, right, this is going to equal, and then what I'll do is I'm going to actually link it to my data, this cell here, and I want it to be all the cells to the right, so I can either highlight all the cells to the right or just type in the hash symbol, and that's fine. That will now work. If I click OK, it's looking good back here. So if I actually have AU in here, you'll see that it's actually giving me just those with AU. If I change it to BR, oh rats, this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell, because we've said it's got to be something in the list, and it's not in the list, the letters AU. So what I have to do is, I've got it working fine, but I've got to go back to my data validation. So Alt-DL, remember, is the keyboard shortcut to bring it back. And I've got to go to my error alert, and in here, what I must do is uncheck show error alert after an invalid data is entered. So what it will do is it will actually not come up with that warning, and then click OK. And that's all right. That's now got it with AU in there, and I can now type BR, and if I go to BR in here, I've got all those with BRs in it. It's looking good. But the problem's going to be, if I go back to my data validation, Alt-DL, for the settings, I'm going to have to type in the next one as I go down here. I've got data $I $13 hash. For the next one, I'll have to type in data $I $14 hash and so on. Or I can get rid of the dollar signs, but copying it down won't work here. I need a way of it going down to the next list item the whole time. How do I do that? Well, that's why I had this stuff here, because this is what I want to throw into that data validation list. How do I get that into my data validation list? And the answer is I use a function called indirect. Let me introduce this age-old function which has strengths and weaknesses which will be useful here. Let me type some numbers in some cells. So I'm going to type in here the numbers 1, 2, and copy it down. So let's say row 20. So numbers 1 to 20. Now here I'm going to type in cell A5. Now indirect works like this. If I go equals indirect and then click on this cell, what will happen is it won't return the value in cell D3. It will look at what the cell value is in D3, which is A5, and it will go there. So the value in A5 is the number 5. It equals 5. If I change it to A9, A9 has the value 9. It is 9. See how it works? Indirect is a way of actually citing a cell reference so that it actually bypasses the cell reference cited and actually goes to the cell reference cited instead, if that makes any sense at all. So you specify the cell reference in a cell, you use indirect to refer to that reference, and it will go not and return that value, but the value of the cell reference that you stipulated. And you can type sheet 4, A3, and all sorts of other wonderful things. And that's the plan here. I've put in equals data exclamation mark I14 hash. So it's going to return the value. That's what we're going to do. We're going to use indirect in the data validation list. Let me show you. So returning to my example then, let's get rid of the BR in here, and I'll actually get rid of the data validation altogether for the moment. So I'll just clear it, clear all, click OK, and I'll just copy this down so we get the formatting in all those cells like this. And then I'm going to apply the data validation all in one go while I've got all those cells highlighted. I'm going to actually use the indirect to refer to cell E23, E24, and so on. So I'm going to go in here and actually go, right, let's get this working. So back to data validation, and I'm going to go list again, but this time what I'm going to do, making this a little bit simpler, let's put this right next to this, is equals indirect, open brackets, and I'm going to click over here and click on this cell, and I'm going to get rid of the row reference so it will actually copy down. Then this one will work and will propagate E23, E24. The problem is because it's a dynamic array, it's not going to work, but with indirect, it will. So if I click OK now, after I've put the error alert in and uncheck that again, and click OK, what will happen is if I put AU here, and then click on the drop-down box, I get those with an AU in it. If I go to this one and type in BR, and go to this, I'll get the BRs. And if I go to CO, I can do this. I've got Jenna Cowan of the COD. It's going to tell me there is no data. So you see, you get this idea of what we can actually do in here. That is now finally working. Do you see how many things I've put together to get this to work? Now, I can hide this column or make it very, very narrow if I want to over here to get this knocked out should I wish. Probably best thing is rather than that, so it's not putting the text in, I might decide to say, okay, I'm going to group it. So highlight this and then just Alt-Shift right arrow, or go to the data, group and outline, and then group. And then we can actually group it. So we've got our outputs like this. This as well could also be highlighted, so I could go like this and do group and group again and hide that. And we've got something now that's working. So AU can be Dolores, etc. We have now got a dynamic data validated list using all those wonderful methods. Now you may not have dynamic arrays yet. You will see it soon, but you see how this is a powerful idea of putting the old with the new and the unused and the untried all together. And between it, you can come up with examples where people would have actually used macros before. That's all I'm trying to say in this. And this is why I call this the most comprehensive Excel example ever, because I don't think in any example I've ever come up with, I've used so many different features from different areas of Excel as I have here. And I've done some chart examples and pivot tables and weird and wonderful things all the way. But I think this is pretty cool, even if I don't say so myself. Well, I hope you enjoyed this session. This is where I find out. I'd be very grateful for both this event and for future events if you wouldn't mind doing a quick evaluation. There's the QR code or the bit.ly link. Either way will take you to the survey. It doesn't take more than about 2 minutes to fill out, and it's very useful for feedback in terms of for knowing what we can improve in future events and also in the future of this event. So it would be very good if you could just take a picture of this and fill this out. That would be really useful. And also, Microsoft have been asking, would you mind doing their survey too? So the Microsoft Excel team is seeking research participants. They said they'd love to hear from you, and your involvement will help shape the future of Excel. If you're willing to be contacted to provide feedback and participate in future research studies, why not sign up? So if you go to the aka.ms link at the bottom or look at the QR code here, they'd be delighted if you take the time to fill out that too. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. As I say, if you enjoyed this session, my name's Liam Bastick. If you didn't, my name's Tim Heng. My email address is on screen now, and feel free to look at our website, someproduct.com as well, where we've got lots of other examples too. Thank you very much, and I hope you're enjoying the whole of Excel Virtually Global.